So for today, we'd like to do a brief review of the action model and then talk a little bit, since we have families here this morning in this session and we'll be meeting with students later. For the families, we want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your hopes and fears around your students' transition. Also think about what this transition means for you. It's a big transition for parents as well. It's a change for everyone, and a change that's going to require a lot of adaptations, and some of those are pretty fun and exciting. Some are a little scary. We will look at some really specific communication strategies that hopefully will help you and your students talk about and plan for your upcoming changes a little more effectively, a little more smoothly. And then we'll go over your homework for this week, which is going to focus on putting some of those communication strategies into action. Next slide, please. So this will look familiar to those of you who were here last week. This is the action model for self-determination, that we are more self-determined when we are autonomous. We have lots of choices and options. When we are feeling related to other people, we have that security that comes from our sense of relatedness. And then when we have a sense of our own competence. And our research showed that the way that we can put that into action is if we're able to take these 5 steps. If we know ourselves and our settings, if we believe in ourselves, and then if we can use some really concrete skills to make a plan based on those, on knowing ourselves and valuing ourselves, if we can break that into realistic small chunks, then take action toward it, actually take the risk to take action, and then learn from our experience. And that each act of self-determination helps us to be more self-determined in the future. So that our actions towards self-determination both help us to get what we want as we are working toward that, but also it makes us more capable to get what we want in the future. In the homework from last week, we took a look at how self-determination has played out in our own lives. We looked at it for ourselves in terms of looking at a goal that we had set earlier in our lives, and then looked at how the model played out, like which skills we used in order to work toward our own goal and be more self-determined. And then we also had the same activity, a similar activity for our students, and then asked each of you to communicate with each other about how that played out. So when you looked at how self-determination, how the action model worked for you in real life, reflecting on a goal, and how these steps were useful to you, which of the steps did you find were most important in helping you to meet your goal? And you can write that in the chat link, or if you'd prefer, just to raise your hand and unmute your microphone and share that way, that's fine. But I'm curious how you found it played out in your life.
Sharon, I'm going to just jump in quickly if I may. Sorry to interrupt. It might be helpful. I'm watching some comments in the chat room. Just to clarify again, welcome everybody. This session is primarily for family members, again, for parents or their family members. If students are logged in right now too, that's great. We're glad you're here, but the next session and the next hour is really going to focus on you, the students. So many teachers are with us this morning. We welcome you. We're glad you're here. Again, during this hour, when Sharon and I sort of prompt and seek feedback, we'd love to hear from everybody. But in particular, we'd really love to hear from family members right now, not the students, but parents, grandparents, other family members. That's kind of the focus of this hour. And I'm assuming we've got some of those family members with us right now. So starting with you all, that's where we're really hoping to hear from you in response to what you learned last time about this action model and some of the things that you may have looked at in your workbook over the past week as well, too.
So thank you, David, for that. Sharon, go ahead and repeat the question again, please.
Okay. Last week, we asked you to think about a goal that you had set for yourself in the past. And, you know, if you weren't here last week, then I invite you to just consider the same question right now. That think about a goal that you had set for yourself at some point in time, something you really wanted to do, something you wanted to accomplish. And as you look at this model, the action model for self-determination with the 5 steps of know yourself, value yourself, plan, act, experience outcomes, and learn. As you think about how you work toward that goal, which of those steps were most important for you in achieving your goal?
I'm seeing again, Sharon, some comments in the chat that you may be seeing too. I think we may just have 1 or 2 parents with us this morning right now.
And I invite all of you who are on right now to participate in this, that as teachers, I'm sure you have set goals for yourselves in the past. In fact, lots of them, and lots of them every day. I'd like everyone who's participating, whether you're a parent or not a parent, I'd like all of you to consider a goal that you've set and kind of vividly put yourself back as you were working toward that goal. And I'd like you to think about which steps in this model made sense to you, which ones were most important to you in being successful in achieving that goal.
So Kay shared with us that knowing my strengths and weaknesses let me know if I could truly accomplish my goal. So that was the foundational start for Kay. Most important step for me was the valuing yourself. Karen shared that. Thank you, Karen. Let's see here. Sorry, as they move, it's kind of hard for me to track this. I apologize. Planning and acting. I wish I had more of the value of yourself. That's from one of our participants as well. Michelle wrote, knowing your strengths and weaknesses is very important. Planning was the most important step for Zion. Thank you all for sharing these great examples here. Having confidence in being able to accomplish my goals was really important for Joanna. She got started on some goal-directed behavior. Moving from planning to acting, I sometimes spend too much time planning, maybe too much time in my head before I get into action, Kathy writes. These are great examples.
They are. And they are, to me, very telling in that I think that lots of times we tend to focus on either self-awareness, knowing what we like, dreaming about something, or we focus on the action steps, but too often we don't put the two together. And that is what self-determination is all about. That to know yourself, to know what you want, to have dreams, but to not have the skills or the willingness to act on it, if the risk is too scary, you're just kind of left sitting alone with your dreams, and you're not self-determined. You're not determining what happens to you next. You're just dreaming about it. If we work on the social skills, if we work on communication strategies, we help students learn how to plan, we work on assertive communication, but we don't know, we're not helping the students learn what they want or learn to believe in themselves, then they're just really learning how to be compliant with what others want for them. And as we're looking at transitioning from school to what's beyond and making choices about what students want after they leave school, as we learned last week, if they can be more self-determined, which requires marrying the self-awareness and belief in self with action, then we can help them be much more successful in what they choose to do after they leave school. The other piece is developing the belief in self comes primarily from acting and learning from those actions. And so that's one of the reasons that we start off trying to help students learn to take small actions towards something that they would like. And that helps them to build it helps to minimize the risk that they're taking first in terms of actions toward what they want. And also it helps them to build confidence and belief in themselves in order to move forward. So it's really the combination of these that are so important, and starting off small and then working up to bigger steps. Are there other questions or comments from the chat to address?
Sion, I see that you've unmuted. Did you have a comment that you wanted to make?
Well, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. I'm sorry. I couldn't get my computer booted up and my son's on the other one, so I'm walking around with my phone. But I'm I feel like I'm trying to catch up from what we missed on the first session, and what you were explaining just sounds amazing. In terms of self-determination and small steps, and it's something that I wish I had done it that way.
You know,
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
probably what we hear most often from adults
Mhm.
is, wow, I
Mhm.
wish I'd had this in school. And it really affirms how important it is for all of us, whether we have a disability or don't have a disability or whatever age we're at. It's something that can be important. One of the other activities that we asked parents and students to do was to chat a little bit about which skills they thought they were strongest in, which ones they most wanted to improve in. Does anyone have any thoughts? And it can either be family and student pairs that you discuss that, or it can be for yourself reviewing what the model looks at. Are there parts of this model that to you seem hardest, and others that you think you, in order to move forward with it, would need to strengthen a little bit more? I know one comment we had was, I sometimes spend too much time in planning and have trouble getting to action. I can relate to that one. You know, taking that risk is sometimes harder, and something I need to work on. Other thoughts and comments about which parts of this are hardest, which ones are more strengths that you can rely on?
We have a few comments in the chat, and I think everyone agreed with you in that the action step was the hardest step. Karen agreed with that. And then let's see, let me get my chat going. I think that was it. Oh, wait, the motivation to act is there, Karen says, but just can't seem to get there.
Mhm.
And then someone else wrote, experience outcomes and learn. So once you reach your goal, you can continue meeting this expectation and performing at a certain level. Lisa says, I think kids experience a lot of challenges that challenge as they are in school. We spend our evenings on homework, and there's a little time at the end of the day to know what her son loves and feels good about. He wants to do something, but he doesn't know what that is yet.
Mhm. And it sounds like one of the things that I'm hearing is the importance of taking some time to both explore options so that you know what some of the options are, and also to reflect on them. And one of the things that we've been concerned about is sometimes there are so many demands on us and demands on students that it's really difficult to take the time to reflect on what we want. We're just too busy sometimes getting ready for that next test. And so finding ways to carve out some time to explore new things, to think about what you'd like to do. And we'll keep coming back to relationships. And that's why we're so excited about having students and families and teachers together for this session, that being able to take the risk, we get more support from our families, from our friends, from our teachers. It makes it easier to take that risk, and also breaking it down into smaller chunks.
And that's very true. And then what Kathy said, just kind of knowing yourself in a new or unfamiliar situation, that's that risk piece that you're describing, Sharon. She feels that that is a great help in taking first steps. So, and if it doesn't work out, it's okay. You know?
Right. Yes. Yes. And that's really important. It's not only okay, but it's also still a strength. If you take that risk, it doesn't work out, that it gives you an opportunity to learn more, both about what you want the next time and also your skills in making that happen. So one of the things I'd like to turn to now, next slide, please. This is a big change for all of us. It's a big change for the family members. Well, it's the biggest change for the students, obviously. They're the ones who are going through the biggest change and the primary change. But that also results in it being a big change for the family members of that student, for the friends of that student, the mentors, the teachers. One of the things that we asked people to do last week is to consider, what are some of your hopes and fears around this change for all of you? Hopes and fears for the students, hopes and fears for yourselves. And whether or not you had the opportunity to reflect on this during the week, if you can reflect on it for a few minutes now. What are some of the things that are scariest about it? What are some of the things that you're most hopeful about and excited about?
Michelle shares fear of failure.
Yep. That is a big one. And one of the things that we try to do in self-determination is to make the failure less scary, or the opportunity for failure less scary, by breaking things down into really small steps, so that if you fall, you don't fall very far. We also try to anticipate potential results from our actions. So before we ever take the action, we've already considered what might happen. Do we still want to take that action, or do we want to put in a safety net of some kind, so that failure isn't quite as scary?
Looks like one of our parents maybe shared the fear of his son not having all the skills needed to live independently, particularly in terms of emotional self-regulation.
Okay.
Amber talks about success and happiness. Joanna shared that the fear of the unknown and not having enough resources is the biggest worry. Cyan again shares that her son never moves forward toward his goal and, can remain happy just doodling in his room and as an adult and not maybe wanting anything bigger for his life. Kay shares a concern about what happens when the parents aren't here. What will happen to their sons or daughters who will help take care of them in our place.
Mhm. And these are all really valid concerns and really important to be considering now when we can make plans for them. And I feel so honored to be part of the preparation that you're doing now. When we looked at the registrations, I know we have some families with students who are in middle school, many in high school, some who are getting ready to graduate, but you're all planning ahead. And the more that we can plan ahead, the more successful we can be in mitigating and planning for some of these concerns. And I think of how it takes a village. And as a parent, boy, I can't think of anything that takes, almost any of our efforts take a village, but parenting really takes a village, and it takes a village as we support our students through adulthood, not just when they're little, to be able to reach out to others, to find additional resources, to be able to help our students find other adults in their lives who can help them, not just the parents. And I think that sometimes, I know for myself, sometimes when there's something that feels really scary, it's like, oh, finally I get to a point where I just don't want to think about it. However, the more we can hit it head on, and wow, this is a concern, this is a fear, I'm not sure there will be other people there for her. I'm not sure that he will have the motivation to do something. And motivation comes from those first three elements that we talked about: having a sense of autonomy, feeling like there are choices you can make, having a sense of competence, having something that you think you do well, and having good relationships, knowing that there are other people you can count on. And so the more that we can help our students meet those three basic psychological needs, and they've been proven to be basic needs that we all have, the more motivation, the more energy they will have. And we can start small to help them meet those needs by helping them implement the 5 action steps of know yourself, value yourself, plan, act, experience outcomes, and learn. And picking out really small steps to begin with, we can help to increase that motivation. Next slide, please. I'd like you to ponder, and this will be something that I'd encourage you to ponder over the next few years, and actually, throughout the change that your sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, mentees, friends are going through, your students are going through. I'd like to invite you to consider how your relationship with your son or daughter or friend will change as they make changes in their lives, as well as how is your own life going to change? How do you want your life to change during that time? And we certainly have had experiences with our lives changing as our children left preschool to go to elementary school to go to middle school to go to high school. Actually, I've learned from Carla in this, she will often say when her daughter makes a change, she'll say, and her daughter is in her late 20s now?
She's actually 30, Sharon.
30, okay. She'll say, we're moving this summer. Well, her daughter no longer lives in her home with her, so literally that's not true. However, you know, when her daughter makes a change, it makes a change in Carla's life as well. When my daughter makes a change, it makes a change in my life. And sometimes I need to make changes in my own life to adapt for that. Sometimes there's been a big hole left in that while I was still needed, maybe I wasn't needed as often or as much. And if I didn't make some other plans for myself, I could have easily become pretty overbearing. And I would have missed out on some really fun things to do. Kind of a lark one time, I took a tap dancing class when I realized, I might be calling Alana a little too often, my daughter, when she was first year in college. And it turned out to be pretty fun. So I offer this slide just to encourage you to think about both your relationship changing and also your own life changing. And with that, I will turn it over to David. And next slide, please.
Thanks, Sharon. So we're going to sort of pivot now. The first half of this presentation today has been sort of at the idea stage. We wanted to review both models of self-determination that we introduced last week, both the action model, which comes from sort of an educational, special educational perspective, and the psychological model that Desi and Ryan introduced. To give you all, again, just an idea of what self-determination is about, why it's important, and how over time, it's a developmental process, right? It's not something that happens in a week. It's not something that is done a year from now. For our whole lives, every time we pursue goals that are important to us, whether they're big or small, can give us the opportunity to increase our self-determination depending on how we go through that goal-directed cycle. And so having hopefully updated everybody, reminded you all, given you a chance to think more this morning about what self-determination just means, what we like to do for the second part of our presentation today is to introduce some tools, some specific strategies or techniques that you can use with your sons, your daughters, your mentees, your students to promote their self-determination. Two other things, and then we'll go on to the next slide. But first of all, just a reminder, in the action model of self-determination, the model that Sharon and her colleagues at Wayne State helped to develop, you recall that a lot of the focus is on the steps, the 5 steps that the individual can take. But all 5 of those steps are surrounded by something called the environment, and that's us. So the way that we think about students and children, the way that we interact with them, the way that we talk with them, the expectations we have for them, all of that is almost like this force field of energy that can promote or thwart their self-determination. So as we go through these next few slides, what we're going to do today is to introduce, again, primarily some communication skills. And I bet a lot of you already use many of them, maybe have even studied them or heard about them. So we haven't made them up ourselves, but we find that in combination, when you use these techniques, when you're working with a son, a daughter, a student, a young person you care about, if you're intentional about your use of these skills, you can't help but end up promoting their self-determination. Because now that force field of energy that you're bringing to the interaction with them is encouraging them to plan, to take action, to reflect on what's happened, all based on efforts to help them better understand themselves and value themselves. In a recent book that Sharon and I were able to co-edit for the Association of Higher Education and Disability, AHEAD, and the name of that book is there at the bottom of the slide, Becoming Self-Determined, Practical Strategies for a Changing World. We wrote this for college students and people who work with college students. And we invited a mother-son team to write the last section. And Maureen Beach is the mother. Her son, Colin, is a college student at Rose Hoffman Institute in Indiana, and he has a visual disability. He's brilliant. He's studying to become a research scientist. I think he's going to change the world. But they wrote about the use of technology and how his use of technology can promote or thwart his self-determination, same as hers. And Maureen shared from her perspective as a parent, raising this young man with a disability and trying to help him launch. She shared a quote that we wanted to share with you all today because we think this sets the stage for moving into sort of the practical tips part of the presentation. Let's go over this together. We just thought this was so powerful and so congruent with self-determination, even though Maureen had never studied self-determination before we asked him to write this part of the book. She said, parents must first understand that their roles change over time, that parental roles shift from one of total control to a coach, and then finally to one of support. You see that developmental sequence play out, right? She's thinking back to when Colin was a little boy, when he was a teenager, now that he's in college, and she's recognizing, I need to keep changing how I'm interacting with him to promote that ongoing growth, that growth in his self-determination. But life's messy, right? So Maureen acknowledges these lines get blurred in everyday life, especially as the child reaches high school and then college, if that's what they choose to pursue, and lastly, to a working adult. So she's not saying it's easy, and we know that. We all know that. We honor that in you. But we hope that what we're doing in these workshops with you all is giving you both sort of a cognitive framework and also now some practical tools you can use when you engage with young people to continue to promote their self-determination whenever you get a chance. Next slide, please. So the first communication tool that we want to introduce is taken from a wonderful book that came out a few years ago called How to Talk So Teens Will Listen and Listen So Teens Will Talk. And you can go on YouTube and just Google that and see some somewhat dated but still really powerful videos of Adele Faber and Elaine Maslish, who are both teachers and mothers, who wrote this book. And they sort of role play and demonstrate how to use these skills. Many of us, particularly when we're stressed or busy ourselves, when we've had a long day, if the young person that we're interacting with encounters a problem, asks for help, gets stuck reaching a goal, whether it's a big one or a small one, whether it's a homework assignment or a big decision or getting a job or figuring something out in their life, what do most of us tend to do? We tend to tell them what to do. We tell them what we would do. We offer advice. And while that's well-intended, what that does is it robs a young person of the chance for themselves to figure out, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What are my fears here? What are my options? To do all that work in the action cycle that promotes their self-determination. So we want to encourage you all to use active listening intentionally, rather than giving advice whenever you can. It may seem messier. It may seem like it takes more time to fix the problem. But if that becomes your mode of interaction whenever you can, what you end up doing over time is saying to your son or daughter or student, through your deeds as well as through your words, I believe that you have the ability to figure some of this out yourself. And I want to support you in doing that. But I know that first you may have to just vent and talk through those fears or those frustrations or that anger that you might be feeling right now before you can sort of take a deep breath, drop your shoulders, get through that emotion, and then those wheels in your brain can then free themselves up to start going, now that I've been heard, now that I got that out, you know, I appreciate you listening to me because an idea just came to my mind. I think maybe what I should do next is, and that's what we want, right? Whenever we can get a young person to come up with the idea themselves, you know, yay us and yay them. That's what self-determination looks like, again, on a small decision or on a big project. Every time that young person says, I think I want to, or I think I could, they're moving toward a more self-determined goal. And so again, this slide, the videos that you could watch, the book if you wanted to read it, can give you some tools for just listening actively, to hear, to support, to encourage more, that leads to that problem solving that comes next after we've been heard on an emotional level. Next slide, please.
David, can I add one comment?
Please,
As an
Sharon.
example, as a parent, I got the very best strategy out of this book of any communication strategy ever as a parent. And that was when something maybe wild and crazy is said, to just acknowledge it, acknowledging that emotion, like you're saying, David. So like when I'd hear, I don't want to go to school in the morning, instead of saying you have to go to school, say, gosh, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great if you didn't have to go to school? I didn't have to go to work. Well, oh, wouldn't that be fun? And it just diffused it and went on
Thanks,
for the
Sharon.
day. Okay, let's go. Okay,
Good.
Dave.
Okay. And again, we're in the workbooks giving you all some activities over the next 2 weeks where you're going to be able to practice some of these strategies. So we don't have as much time today necessarily to really go into depth with all of this, but we hope we're identifying some tools that you can just practice and have fun with, some sites on the internet where you can go and maybe watch some videos to learn more about this. And we just invite you to play with them over the next couple of weeks before we come back together and see what that's been like for you. Another communication tool that we want to introduce and invite you to use comes from the world of life coaching or ADD coaching. I've learned this as an ADD coach myself. Coaches refer to powerful questions. So we all ask questions. So what's different about this? Powerful questions are brief and open-ended. They don't use the personal pronoun I, because again, once again, just like after listening, when we use powerful questions, we're not giving advice. We're not telling young people what we think they should do. We're sort of encouraging their executive functioning to go to work. And so when we're interacting with our son or daughter, whether they're venting, whether they're trying to problem solve, whether they're working with a student, a powerful question is just a brief, open-ended question that we ask, and then we stop and listen. And sometimes the stopping and listening is the hardest part. We want to keep talking. We want to keep explaining. We want to rationalize or sell our idea. And as long as we're talking, we're like those adults in the Charlie Brown specials at Thanksgiving and Christmas in the heads of the young people we're trying to help. We quickly become adults who sound like this, wah, 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 wah. Whereas if we use powerful questions instead, what would it be like for you to get started on that goal? Wow, I hear that that's really a big challenge for you. Where could you get some more information? I am overwhelmed with this homework assignment. I don't understand what we're supposed to do on this project. I just want to quit. I can see how frustrated you are. If you wanted to make some progress once you could work through that frustration, what would that progress look like though? Those kinds of powerful questions, there's no definitive list. We just, again, know that we've asked a powerful question when it's brief. We stop and listen. It's open-ended. It's not leading or suggesting an answer. It's truly You ask, you stop, you lean in, you're really curious, you want to hear, what is he or she going to come up with? Because coaches who ask these questions fundamentally believe that people usually can come up with their own best answers when they're supported in doing so. So this is another way that we in the environment can promote that action work on the part of our young people by asking questions that get them thinking. Next slide, please. We're going to go, thank you. The next strategy that we want to briefly introduce today and invite you all to have fun with, play with, practice. It's called the stoplight strategy. This is another technique that comes from the world of life coaching, ADD coaching. Like a stoplight, what we're going to do here is invite a red light, a yellow light, or a green light. What's that all about? There are times when it's appropriate and helpful for us as adults to offer a suggestion, to run an idea by the young person we're trying to help. Sometimes they really are stuck, frustrated, overwhelmed. They're not going to come up with their own ideas, no matter how many powerful questions we ask or how much active listening we engage in. And so when we see that that's really the case, and I would suggest we try to elicit those ideas from our sons, our daughters, our students first, and then offer a suggestion if that seems necessary next. What we want to do first is to introduce the concept of a stoplight. And again, some of our students and children can be very familiar with those, some aren't. So you might even want to have a picture like the icon you see here in the slide available when you introduce this idea. But the idea of the stoplight strategy is simply this. I'm happy to share an idea, a suggestion with you, but here's how this works. I want you to think about my suggestion without feeling like you have to say yes. If you don't like the idea, if you don't think it's going to work, then I want you to feel free to say no. That's a red light. I don't think that's going to work for me. I appreciate you running it by me, but yeah, no. And sometimes the really rich work then comes up with your follow-up question to a red light, which is, I'm so pleased that you could be honest with me and say you wouldn't do that. Can you tell me why? Why was that a red light for you? What didn't seem to work for you in that idea? And again, you're not trying to change their mind here, but you're listening. Did it seem like too much work? Did it require tools the student doesn't think he or she has? Whatever it is, that can tell you a lot about how that young person is getting stuck or trying to make decisions and viewing themselves as an actor in their life in that moment. So the red light is yeah, no. A yellow light's kind of like the compromise. Your son, your daughter, your student might say, well, I like some of that. I kind of see where you're coming from, but I wouldn't do it like that. I would do it like this. And again, yay. We're lighting up executive functioning in their frontal lobes. We're getting them to think and decide and plan to take action based on what they know about themselves. So a yellow light is, well, my version would look like this, Mom, Dad, Mrs. Smith. And you're like, wow, that sounds really cool. Tell me more about how that would play out. I'd love to hear more about what you're thinking right now. The green light, as you might appreciate, is simply the young person saying, I like that idea. I think I can do that. Thanks. Let's go with that. So the stoplight strategy does allow us to share ideas. That's still certainly something we can do that promotes self-determination, but we shouldn't begin with advice. We shouldn't begin by telling somebody what to do. And when we feel like it might be helpful to do that, we want to create a framework in which the young person feels really comfortable being very independent in what they do with our advice giving. And the stoplight strategy I've just found over the years working with families is a really fun, sort of low tension, easy to remember and employ framework for doing that. Next slide, please. Finally, a lot of us are very familiar with I statements, and of course, what's in opposition to an I statement, a you statement. We've learned from the fields of conflict management, you know, those of us who've looked at having those difficult conversations, having to learn how to de-escalate tense situations, that using I statements can be a very effective way to lower the thermometer and really help the people that we're in communication with take a deep breath too, and stay engaged with us in conversation rather than saying, no, leave me alone. I don't want to talk about this. Go away. I'm overwhelmed right now. I don't like what you're telling me to do. And we see that often in young people in various ways. Sometimes there's no words, there's just the crossed arms or the head down, and they've checked out. And so when we use I statements, and we encourage young people to learn to use I statements, that allows us to express our feelings honestly without attacking, without promoting defensiveness. And so if we model our use of I statements, we end up teaching the young people we're working with how to do the same thing. We learn to say, I feel hurt, as opposed to, why are you being so mean? We learn to say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now because I don't feel like I'm being heard. Instead of, you treat me like an old rat. You know, you're ignoring me. You're not listening to me right now. Usually when we hear ourselves using you statements, we're upset, we're attacking, we're kind of blaming. When we use I statements, we're being honest, we're maintaining our own boundaries, so, and we're being respectful. And so particularly when our conversations with young people is tense or charged with negative emotion, our intentional use of I statements can allow the conversation at times to proceed to a more relaxed, interactive state. We can get past that initial resistance or anger or defensiveness and get to the point where then we're back to really having a good, open conversation. So very quick overview of 4 different communication techniques. I apologize for not having more time to really go over all that with you, but I think a lot of these, again, are probably techniques we've used and are familiar with. And again, over the next couple of weeks, we're really going to encourage you to use the activities in the workbook to practice these. Go on the internet, watch videos, read more to learn more about them. Together, these tools, when used intentionally, can help us communicate in ways that really promote self-determination in much more effective ways. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sharon now as we begin to wind down our time together today.
David and Sharon, you had a couple of questions in the chat. Sharon, if you're going to wrap things up and then you can answer it at the end, or if this is a good time, I can read those to you.
Well, I think I can address those as I wrap it up.
Okay.
I saw those, that
Wonderful.
how do we help students who struggle with communication strategies to use these strategies? And our next session with students, we're going to be working with them very specifically on developing some communication skills, learning how to use I statements, win-win negotiations, how to deal with emotion, you know, some techniques and strategies to set emotion aside so that we can communicate our ideas and thoughts. And I would say for students who struggle specifically with communication, we probably address that in the same way we do everything else with when a student struggles with something. We start off small and we break it down into small steps, and we help that student to grow in their ability to use that skill. Or we help them find ways to circumvent that skill. Like I noticed that someone else wrote in the chat box how much they like the stoplight strategy because it relies on visuals rather than just verbal communication. And so to meet the needs of each student, it's really getting to know that individual student and finding the best ways to either circumvent the need for that skill, like through the use of pictures or other kinds of things, or break that skill down into the smallest components to help them learn it. For your homework this week, we're going to invite you to spend a little quiet time reflecting for yourself. How is your life likely to change, and what kinds of things might you be interested in and excited for yourself as you adapt to the change of your student doing something different? And then also we have some activities that we invite you to practice with your students, some of the skills you learned today, the stoplight strategy, some of the how to talk so teens will listen. And we're going to be inviting the students to also use some of their skills with you that they're learning in the next session. So and our next session is in 2 weeks, same time, 2 weeks from today. And we will all be back together again, students and families and teachers. Any other questions or comments to address before we break? Okay. Again, feel free to contact any of us between now and the next session if you have questions or comments. Carla has put in the chat box where you can find materials, and we will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. And some of you will be staying on for our next session with students.